Hello everyone, welcome to Analog IAS Current Affair Analysis for 7th January 2021. These are the couple of articles that we'll be discussing today. This article titled New Investments in Science is taken from the Indian Express, and it is about how India's policy in the field of science and technology is undergoing a transformation with this policy. So, before getting into the details of this article, let us have a brief background about the development of science and technology in the post independent India. Scientific development in our country is a very old phenomenon, and it started with Indus Valley civilization and much before that as well. So, this scientific temper has always been a part of our culture. So, at the time of independence, the technological infrastructure of India was not much developed and organized when you compare it with the Western world. It was way behind the developed countries. But India had the capability. India was technologically dependent on skills and expertise, but it did have a vision, and this was encapsulated in the Science and Technology Policy Resolution of 1958. Homi Bhabha drafted this scientific policy resolution in 1958, and it was the first one in the domain of science and technology in our country. So, what was the main objective of this? The aim was to develop basic infrastructure for scientific research. The resolution encouraged individual initiative for acquisition of knowledge. Also, it focused on capacity building because a young country with a significant amount of poor people, when compared with the world population, we were facing a challenge with respect to our policy in the terms of resource allocation. So, the first priority in that case was, since we could not spend a lot of money, the focus was on acquisition of knowledge, encouraging more and more number of people to enter into this scientific domain and build the capacities of our country. It is because of this policy resolution only in 1958 we have had the Defense Research and Development Organization in 1958. Later it was followed by Department of Science, which came up in 1971. Then it was followed by Department of Space in 1972, and then we have had the Department of Environment, which today we witness in the form of Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. So this began in 1980. We have had a similar science policy in 1983 as well, which focused upon indigenous technologies. Similarly, in 2003, the government came up with a science and technology policy which at the beginning of new millennium tried to address the multifaceted problems of the 21st century. So there was no single point of focus in this policy. This was the first time we tried to diversify our areas of interest. So, to ensure that the message of this science and technology reaches to every citizen, women and children were encouraged to take up scientific education. Similarly, research in academic institutions was stepped up, though not to the extent that is comparable with the developing other developing countries or developed countries. So, these are the challenges that we were facing. Inclusion of women in the scientific roles, we have had a phenomenon called the leaky pipe syndrome. That is, after a certain age, women have dropped out of the scientific roles, especially as scientists, because they had to take up their traditionally given role of being a caretaker of the child. So this same policy was revamped and a newer version was brought out by the Department of Science and Technology. So this STI policy 2013 also faced more or less same problems because the R&D costs are not in tune with the requirements of the laboratories and various research institutions in our country. So similarly, there is no incentive for the private sector to participate because of weak intellectual property right laws in our country. So all these problems have been unaddressed for a very long time, and in this context, we have the new science and technology policy. So this is where this policy comes into the picture. the entire philosophy of this new science and technology policy is it is emphasizing on certain core principles. Firstly, the decision making is decentralized. So the prior policy structure was designed in such a way that decision making was very much centralized, and there was a elaborate hierarchy even for small decisions. So a certain amount of autonomy would be granted, and the responsibility to take decisions would be delegated to the different fragments of the scientific ecosystem. Secondly, a lot of policy options and budget allocations happened very arbitrarily uh, before this policy. So now we would be just focusing upon data driven, evidence informed policies. So our allocations will depend purely on evidence and scope. Third one is it would be driven by experts and not by the whims and fancies of those who are at power. The next one would be a bottoms up approach which would ensure that there is inclusive growth. The significance of this aspect is we might be coming across a lot of social media posts wherein the rural youth come up with unique innovations, and just because they are not able to get the limelight, just because they don't have a college degree, their innovations don't get recognized and they don't get IPR protection for their unique innovations. Now, a policy which tries to address this anomaly should always necessarily be a bottoms up approach, where you need to have certain institutions, even at the grassroots level, to capture this new innovations, recognize them, incubate them, and transform them into global level industries. We never know what kind of an idea would pop up uh, even at grassroots levels in our villages. So, lack of formal education can never be a reason for expecting some ingenuine products from our rural economy. So, in this context, the basic framework adopted is called the Open Science Framework. Now, what do you understand by this Open Science Framework? In order to understand the developments in the particular domain a person is carrying out a research in, he needs to have access to scientific literature. Now, in order to have this access, the major problem is most of these journals are very expensive, and they're not accessible in public domain, and it is a very restricted space. So ensuring a constant exchange of knowledge between the producers and users of knowledge has been recognized as very important for this open science framework. So the government has actually procured a lot of journals in bulk for a longer period of time. So this will increase access to the scientific literature. The next is the principle of inclusion is also encapsulated in this policy. Firstly, 30% of the representation in scientific institutions and decision making bodies will be allocated to women. Similarly, when we're talking about the LGBTQ community, this community is going to get spousal benefits as well. The policy also proposes the removal of bars on married couples being employed in the same department or laboratory. One of the practical reasons as to why a lot of women drop out of research work is because even though they have the requisite qualification, there is a rule that most of the government companies cannot employ husband and a wife in the same laboratory or department. Because of this policy, a lot of women had to face the brunt because they were forced to drop out or maybe pick up another less paying job. Eventually, even though they have the capability to contribute to the scientific literature and the ecosystem, they dropped out because of this reason. So the policy says that it would be addressing this anomaly. One more practical reason as to why a lot of eligible scientists drop out or don't get access is because of the age cutoff. You know that scientific research domain work is such that the PhD thesis sometimes goes much beyond the normal expectation. So what happens as a result is, even though they have the required expertise, just because of the age cutoff restriction, they don't get access to the research grants and other benefits that can be availed normally. So, in respect to this criteria, the policy tries to correct it and makes it not biological age but academic age. That is, your experience is taken into consideration rather than one's age. The next problem that it is trying to address is with respect to R&D cost. So the costs involved at this present moment is roughly around 0.6 to 0.7% of our GDP. They want to increase this to at least 1.5 to 3% of our GDP. So there are certain recommendations given in this regard. Always remember, unless and until a target is followed up with a formidable recommendation and an action path, the policy will mean nothing. So this policy has indeed given a roadmap for that. More details would be coming up soon. Since this is a draft policy, we will look into the details after it is released. A set of other details and proposals are also a part of this, like establishing a national STI observatory, one nation, one subscription policy, to establish a system where all the research individuals can access research papers through a common platform. So, all the data used and generated from public funded research will be available for all. So, these sort of initiatives are also in the policy, but we'll look at it after the draft policy actually translates into a national level science and technology policy. So, that is the gist of this article. This second article, taken from the Indian Express, titled How Saudi and Qatar Restored Ties, Ending a 3-Year Middle East Crisis. This is a very significant development in the Arab world after the normalization agreement that Israel has signed with a lot of Arab countries, namely UAE, Sudan, etc. So, this is yet another significant improvement in the diplomatic ties between various contesting forces in the region. Now, let us look into the historical aspect of this relation. So, within Islam, there are two sects. One is Sunni, the other one is Shia. Saudi traditionally consists of Sunni sympathizers, and the other faction is Shia faction, where Iran is the major player. Traditionally, the relation between Saudi and Qatar has always been cordial. Now, Qatar was a small country when compared to Saudi, and it was always subservient when compared with Saudi. So, it always complied with what Saudi has actually dictated in the Arab world. But way back in 1996, the Qatari government has decided to launch one of the most watched channel in the region called Al Jazeera. So this is a very famous news channel, and they created this Al Jazeera news channel with the aim to have some soft power. Like in every case, in every country, media is considered to be one of the most significant pillar of a democracy. Even in monarchies and autocratic regimes, having a media is a significant development. So the Saudi monarchy felt that Al Jazeera was actually challenging the Saudi autocracy in the region and Saudi monarchy. So there was always a conflict between Qatar and Saudi with respect to this Al Jazeera channel. But 2017 was the point where the diplomatic ties have actually hit a rock bottom in the Arab world. What happened was, on the allegation that Al Jazeera is proving to be a platform for terrorist sympathizers, Saudi and its allies have actually cut down all sort of diplomatic ties with Qatar. The reason why uh, Qatar is close to Iran is because they share a gas field. So, in order to have access to this gas field, they try to maintain a positive relationship with Iran. So, in this circumstance, the latest development after a sustained effort from Kuwait, which has been playing a mediated role in this entire fiasco, has ensured that Saudi and Qatar reach to a consensus and settle this issue for now. So, that is the gist of this article now.